Components of JMeter in JMeter. Now we are here. You can see components of JMeter. Penning down for your reference. Here the test plan, thread group, samplers, listeners, workbench, assertions, config element, logic controllers, and timer. All major components of JMeter, such as thread groups, samplers, listeners, and config elements, are you can see here. Please refer this diagram to understand each component and their relation to the specific modules of JMeter. Now we would start touching each component of JMeter along with the JMeter to know how it works and how can testers implement this in their testing. Please note that we won't be covering all samplers, listeners now. We will work on the most used ones. And test plan, just as a simple test plan in software testing consists of all steps which execute the script, JMeter test plan has the same purpose. Everything which is included in the test plan is executed in a sequence which is top to bottom or as per the defined sequence in the test plan. Test plan can be as simple as it could be with just thread group, sampler, and listener, and it starts getting more complex as soon as you start adding more elements like config elements, preprocessors, and controllers. As we all know that JMeter measure performance by generating virtual users and threads which hits the server under test if the real users are sending requests to the server. Therefore, every test plan should have the virtual users or thread group as we call them in JMeter terms. Important points about test plan. The test plan should be saved before running. JMeter files or test plans are saved in the form of .jmx extension files. You can also save parts of the test plan as a different selection. For example, if you want to save HTTP request sampler with the listener, you can save it as test fragment. So it can be used in other test scenarios as well. Elements of workbench are not saved with the test plan. Thread group is a group of users which will be hitting the server under test either concurrently or in some predefined sequence. Thread group can be added to the test plan. JMeter test plan by right-clicking the test plan. JMeter is all right-click stuff. You get all the options on the right-click. You can rename thread group name to your own. Just change the name and click anywhere outside the test plan window. You would see the name getting changed. It is very important to configure your thread group as per the test conditions. For example, if you want to test how web behaves when 100th user hits it concurrently, you can set thread group. Samplers. So how does JMeter knows what type of request has been sent to server? It is through samplers. Samplers are must to add to a test plan, as only it can let JMeter know what type of request need to go to which server and with any predefined parameters or not. Request could be HTTP, HTTPS, FTP, TCP, SMTP, SOAP, etc. Samplers can only be added to the thread group, not directly under test plan, as thread groups need to use a sampler to send a request to the server URL under test. Samplers can be added by path thread group, then sampler, then HTTP request. HTTP request, these are the most common requests sent to the servers. Say for example, we want 100 users to hit https://www.google.com concurrently. FTP request, path, then test plan, then thread group, then sampler, then FTP requests. FTP stand for file transfer protocol, and it is used to upload or download the file from the server. JMeter threads send requests to FTP servers to upload or download files from there and measure the performance. Listeners, so till now we have seen a few samplers sending requests to the server, but haven't analyzed the response yet. Performance testing is all about analyzing server responses in various form and then presenting the same to the client. Listeners are used to display the result of the test execution so that testers can get to know the stats. We have around 15 listeners in JMeter, but mostly used ones are table, tree, and graph. View result in a table. This is the most commonly used and easily understandable form of listeners. It displays the result in the form of a table which some important performance parameters. Listeners can be added directly under test plan or under the sampler. The difference is when you add the listener under sampler, it will show the results of that sample only. If we add the sampler directly under the test plan, it displays the result for all sampler up to the hierarchy. View result in a tree. This is another most commonly used listeners and provide details information with the request and response. One can also view the HTML page rendered in response apart from viewing JSON, XML, text, regex. It is very useful as testers can put assertions in response to received to be ensured that the test passed. JMeter results still show pass even if the response is not desired. For example, say we hit HTTP request on any website www.xyz.com, and the response we expect title xyz / title, or in simple words, when we hit this page company home page opens with its name. If we haven't put assertion, JMeter will still display the result since the hit has gone to the server. The workbench is not shown here. The workbench is a place where you can store these elements which are not in use in your current test plan, but which can be later copy pasted in it. When you save JMeter file, the components which are present in the workbench are not automatically saved. You must save them separately by right-clicking and choose Save As option. You all might be thinking what is the use of workbench? Anyways, it is easy to add any component directly to JMeter's test plan. The reason of having workbench is that the user could do some experiments and try out new scenarios. As you already know, elements in workbench are not saved, so the user can literally use anything and then throw away. But there are some non-test components which are only available in the workbench. They are listed here: the HTTP mirror server, HTTPS test script recorder, property display. HTTPS test script recorder is the most important non-test element used in JMeter. It helps testers in recording the script and then configuring the load for each transaction. JMeter only record the request sent to the server. Don't get confused with record and play functionality of QTP Selenium. All requests are recorded and testers can apply the desired load on them to see the behavior. Elements are this element is very important for scenarios where testers don't know what all requests are going to from their application. They can use HTTP script recorder to record the application under testing. Performance testing of mobile application can also be done in this way by setting a JMeter proxy and then recording the request which our mobile app sent to the server. Step-by-step procedure you can go check online. The other component is assertions. It's not shown here. Till now we have covered how JMeter hits the server and how the responses are displayed via listeners. To ensure the response is received in a correct and as per expectation, we need to add assertions. Assertions are simply validations which we need to put on responses to compare the results. Here are some types of assertions. Here are the types of assertions commonly used: response assertion, duration assertion, size assertion, XML assertion, HTML assertion. Response assertion. In response assertion, we can add our own pattern string and then compare them with the response received from a server. For example, you all know response code 200 when any request returns some response successfully. So if we add pattern string response code equal to 102, then the test case should fail. Duration assertion. Duration assertion is very important and validates the server responded within a given amount of time. This can be used in scenarios where we need to sample 100 requests and ensure that every time response is received within the benchmark limit. For example, case 10 users are concurrently hitting google.com server and duration assertion is set to 1000 milliseconds. Config elements. Requests sent to the server can be further parameterized using some config elements which are executed before the actual request. A simple example of it could be reading values of a variable from CSV file for which CSV data set config is used. Here are some important config elements used in the performance testing in the web and mobile application. CSV dataset config, user defined variables, HTTPS request default, HTTPS cache manager, HTTPS cookie manager. CSV dataset config. CSV dataset config helps JMeter in picking values of some parameters from CSV file rather than passing different parameter in each separate request. For example, if we need to test logging functionality with a different set of users and passwords, then we can create two columns with CSV file and enter the values there so that JMeter can pick one for each request sent to the server. User-defined variables. It helps JMeter to pick values from a predefined variable. For example, suppose that you need to create a test plan in which you need to add many HTTP requests on the same URL, and there could be a scenario in which client plans to migrate it later to some different URL. So to avoid updating URL in each request, we can tell JMeter to pick up the URL from UDV, user-defined variable, which can be later updated to handle all requests to the updated URL. To avoid updating URL in each request, we can tell JMeter to pick the URL from the UDV, user-defined variable, which can be later updated to handle all request updated URL. HTTP request defaults. This config element is very useful for specifying the default values for HTTP request. To guide you more, take an example where we need to hit 50 different requests at Google server. In this scenario, we add the HTTP request default when we need not to specify server name, path, or any other properties like port number, connection, timeout properties. Whenever it is specified, the HTTP request default config element is inherited by all HTTP requests. In this scenario, if we add the HTTP request default, then we need not to specify the server name, path, or any other properties like port name, port number, connecting, timeout properties. Whatever is specified in HTTP request default config element is inherited by all HTTP requests. HTTP cache manager and HTTP cookie manager are used in making JMeter behave as a real-time browser. HTTP cache manager can clear cache after each request, whereas the other one can manage the cookies settings. Logic controllers and timers. Logic controllers and timers help JMeter control the flow of transactions. Timers ensure the delay in each thread if need to test any server. For example, if you need the HTTP request to wait for 5 seconds after HTTP request is completed, we can add the timer there. Logic controllers are used to define in the flow of requests which are sent to the server. It can also let you store requests for each module separately, such as logging and logout. Here you can see a test plan is connected to a thread group. The thread group is connected to logic controllers, config element, listeners, and samplers. Logic controller interacts with the if controller, module controller, loop controller, recording controller, random controller, transaction controller. Config element interacts with the CSV dataset config, HTTP request default, user default variable, and HTTP cache manager. Listeners interacts with graph, table, tree, and summary report. Samplers interacts with HTTP request, FTP request, LDAP, LDAP request, SOIP request, and TCP request. Now, this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for watching it.